Welcome to Kathy's Renewed You.
Hi, I'm Kathy's daughter, Tori, and I want to talk a little bit about emotional intelligence today. One sort of piece of it. Because emotional intelligence is a better predictor of a person's success than their IQ. So, EQ, emotional intelligence, trumps IQ as a predictor of success. So, how smart you are isn't as important as how emotionally intelligent you are. And one of the first pieces of emotional intelligence is self awareness. Now, oddly enough, we're not that self aware. We aren't that in touch with how we feel, what we're feeling, and why we feel it. So, this is a tool to help you become more self aware. So, what we're going to talk about today are emotional pennies. So, pretend each day that you have 100 emotional pennies to spend. Right? That's 2 rolls of pennies. All right, so what's an emotional penny? An emotional penny is any little unit that you spend emotionally that is draining. Okay? So anything that you're doing during the day and you find that to be draining, then that's expending an emotional penny. And if you think about it, there was a time when our society was primarily agricultural. And we went out and we worked really hard and we came in at night and we were exhausted. We were physically exhausted. Now, some of us still have jobs like that, but most of us sit behind desks and look at computer monitors. We don't do physically exhausting work, but we come home and we're exhausted too. And that's because we're mentally and emotionally exhausted because we've used up all of our emotional pennies. So, what we want to talk about is minimizing our use of our pennies, because if you look at them, sorry, I'm making some noise there, it's really not that many in a day that you have to use. And in this little game, you don't get to carry them over into the next day, which is true in real life too, that once you've used your emotional pennies for the day or saved some, you don't get to do them for the next day. You just only have 100 for each day, and it's not very many pennies. There's actually 3 categories of pennies. The first category is actually a good emotional energy use, and that is because you want to accomplish something. Like when I wait till the last minute to do these videos, I have used quite a few emotional pennies because I like to plan ahead, I like to have things done ahead, and when I wait till the last minute, I'm using some emotional pennies. If you want to exercise and you're kind of working yourself up into it, I really need to, those are emotional pennies that you're using. Now, we will talk about ways to turn those things that you want to accomplish into habits so you're not using emotional pennies anymore, but that's another talk entirely. The second use of emotional pennies is when you're caught in a worrisome situation. Perhaps someone's ill or not feeling well. Remember our choices. You can't change the situation. You certainly aren't going to run away from the situation because it's someone you care about, and it goes down to accepting it. And if someone's ill or there's trouble, you can mentally do some tricks, so that you're sending healing blue light and saying prayers and things like that. Emotionally, though, there's still going to be some expenditure of emotional pennies, and you just accept that as a part of life and what goes on in life. Now, the third category, those are things, the one I want to focus on and where we have the most power to change. And these are emotional pennies that we are choosing, waving around the magic wand of destiny, and choosing to spend that we don't really need to be spending, that aren't serving us. I guess examples are probably the best way to explain this. If I'm driving down the road and somebody cuts me off, what might my reaction be? Well, one of them is, I'd grab handfuls of emotional pennies and just start throwing them at them and yelling. I have other options though. The mental trick that I play is I think, oh, they must be going to visit their sick grandma in the hospital, or oh, they probably have a sick child at school, that they're going to get. I mean, in reality, probably none of those are true, but it doesn't matter. If I spend emotional pennies because some person I don't know has cut me off on the highway, I'm spending emotional pennies on something I have no control over. I'm not making it better. by getting upset about it and by taking handfuls of pennies and tossing them out the window. My other example that's not terribly popular with some people is sports teams, professional sports teams. It's great to root for your team, but when you let a loss of your team affect you the next day, you're tossing out some emotional pennies that you don't need to be tossing out. I mean, really, you don't have any control over the outcome of the game if you're sitting there watching it on television. I've tried, I've yelled a lot. They never, ever hear what I have to say when I'm yelling at them from my sofa. You might as well go outside, look around, and yell at the wind and say, "You are not going the right direction." Right? It's a situation that you don't have any power or control in, and yet you're letting it affect your life, right? So that's the sorts of expenditures of emotional pennies that we want to avoid. Now, thinking of life and choices in terms of emotional pennies can be very useful. There was a time when I was offered a job to work on the computer labs for a school that my boys were attending at the time. I wanted to see if I liked computers. I'm good with them, and I wanted to try a job to see if it was good. I was in charge of the computers and a couple of servers. Anyway, they came back to me and said, "Oh, well, we can only afford to have you part-time." Ugh. Well, I knew that there was no way to do this job part-time. I mean, absolutely no way. Kids lost their passwords and teachers' computers went down and stopped working. And I mean, they just needed a computer person there all the time. And because I know me and I know that I won't do a job unless I can do it really, really well, I knew that I would be there all day, that I would go in with the kids and I would leave with the kids, and I would be getting paid for only half of that time. So I told them to give me the weekend to think about it and weighed the pros and cons, the experience I would get, a little bit of a discount on their tuition. And I came to the conclusion that I wanted to do the job. But I made the resolution then and there that I would never be resentful. I would never throw emotional pennies around because I wasn't getting paid as I should have been paid for doing that job. It was intentionally waving around the magic wand of destiny and choosing to do the job, and then choosing not ever to be resentful or to feel put upon, because I knew exactly what I was walking into before I did it. Now, that's not to say that I never slipped every now and then and went, I can't believe I'm doing this. But then I just reminded myself, hey, you don't need to spend any emotional pennies on that. You knew that when you went in. It's a decision that you made, and you're in that accept phase. And it's time to accept it without the use of any emotional pennies. So our goal in life each day, because this is a daily exercise, is to spend as few emotional pennies as possible, to spend them on things that matter, to really do it intentionally. I mean, really, that's what my whole gig, my whole message really is: intentionality, doing things on purpose. Right? And emotional pennies are no different. It's knowing, one, being aware, I'm spending emotional pennies, and two, is this something I really want to spend emotional pennies on? Is it worth it? Is it something I can conserve and maybe do things a little bit differently and not use my emotional pennies on this thing? So go out there, count your pennies, and may the number of pennies that you count be few.